code with primary students. So Shoshana Zuboff says technology makes the world a new place. That is absolutely true. And in a way, technology is a routine part of all of our lives, and even more so for our students because they don't know any other life without a device. Our world has become more connected, has become more interactive than it ever has before. We have such a great opportunity to lay the foundations of how that world works when we teach our young learners how to code. So, of course, the question is always like, what needs to be in place before we can even teach coding? Well, for sure, we got to lay some foundation for student independence. And that is absolutely true for coding instruction to be successful. Classrooms, whether it's a regular ed classroom, a special ed classroom, a library media center, a STEM room, has to have its own foundations in place because these structures are going to develop student independence in all of their learning activities, not just coding. But because primary coding is highly engaging, these structures are even more important. When all of these structures are in place, it's going to ensure and decrease the amount of off task behavior. It is going to increase the amount of engagement and students wanting to stay at a station longer than they typically would. So, coding is not the first unit you are going to want to teach to a primary class because there is a lot involved in learning to code. They need time to learn their routines, they need time to learn procedures, and they need time to learn how to care for materials. They also need time learning how to function, pun intended, within stations or centers. They need to understand like what's their role and responsibility when they're at a center, how do they clean up at a center, um, and how to use materials at a center. Additionally, they also need to gain that skill of making decisions or choices that are academic in nature when it's time to learn. And this does take some time to build. Even for our younger students who make interest based decisions, we can capitalize on that and teach them how to use that when making decisions about learning. So, a few routines and procedures that you're going to want to have in place. And this is true whether you're teaching in a classroom or in a specialist area, is having our students learning how to transition into a specialist area. How do they come in through the door? How do they sit down? Or in a regular classroom, how do they transition into a lesson? Now, this is also a life skill that is super beneficial, particularly when they gain employment, because they're going to need to, how to learn how to transition into a meeting, how to transition into their office space, all of that stuff. So, when transitioning, I find it super helpful to use songs and movement activities. And a couple of my favorites are the interactive poem Hands Go Up, the song Circle Up, and other movement activities. Because primary age students cannot sit for long periods, though, they also need an opportunity to practice whole body listening. They are going to need that time to learn how to listen quietly during instruction. This is going to help so much to decrease those questions. They're going to need to learn how to raise their hand when they're ready to talk, and learning how to wait to be called on, which is super important because if there's a lot of interruptions, other children in the room are going to find it difficult to listen. And they also need to learn how to give a silent response, like a thumbs up, a thumbs down response, to agree or disagree, and also using the Me Too symbol when they make a connection to somebody else. All of these are skills that show respect and assist in not only their learning, but their classmates' learning as well. And it's definitely in the nature of a primary student to bounce between activities. They'll be like, oh, I want to do this for 3 minutes. And then they're like, want to get up and go try something else for another 3 minutes. It's also in their nature to want to creatively use materials. So when we're using blocks, they're going to naturally just want to build with them. And it's important that we give them opportunity to do both because that's going to help them learn how to stay on task when we're using those highly engaging materials during a station or a center. And the key is designing highly engaging lessons. So when the lesson is engaging, it makes it incredibly easier for them to stay on task. It's also teaching students how to use materials for learning and how to use their time while they're independently working. Once they have those skills, this is where stations and centers really come into place, but they also need some skills to learn how to function in centers or stations. So, true story, I was student teaching a gazillion years ago in a fourth grade classroom, and it was the middle of the year. And by the time I got there, the students already knew how to transition from one station to the next. And I didn't have anything to do with teaching that. Their classroom teacher had already set it up. So when I went to go and apply that in my own classroom, it was an utter disaster because I had never seen how she taught that and set it up. But I've since learned some tips and tricks for how to make that go pretty smoothly. So, stations and centers are essential instructional tool in primary grades. It allows us to differentiate for our students. It allows us to make sure everyone has access to a limited number of materials because budgets, and it makes sure that we can give students some choice. So when using stations, it's incredibly helpful to consider how are kids going to move from and to stations. So for example, when children are expected to go to all stations, it is helpful to have them move from one station to the next in a clockwise manner each time. And however, you have them rotate. Keep the rotation the same every time to keep it predictable for them. And routines like these help support the flow of movement in the room, and it also leads to independence because it becomes so predictable, they can then do it on their own. If children are choosing stations, the key is designing a calm and orderly way for this to occur. So, some examples are they can think about where they want to go and give a thumbs up when they're ready. You can choose names and then have them go to their station when they're called upon. You may want to design a sign up board for them to move their names or pictures to choose their preference. And you can do this with a pocket chart, you can do it with a smart board, you can even do it with a Google slide. If students switch to a second choice, you're going to want to make sure you have a calm, orderly way for them to do that as well. And of course, cleaning up stations can take some time depending on the materials used and how many rotations will occur. Sometimes it's best for the children to quickly tidy up the station if they're moving on to a new station. That way it's ready for the next group. This is especially true when using the Osmo or something like the design and drill. Like it doesn't have to be completely picked up, but if it's just tidy enough for the next group to carry on, it's all good. Sometimes it's best for children to wait, clean up the station once the activity time is complete. This is especially true when using the design and drill because it takes forever to clean that up. So don't bother cleaning that up until the end of the class. And to begin with, it's important to have them practice with similar materials so that they learn what it looks and sounds like to clean up that type of material. Sometimes it makes sense to have students experience all the available stations, and other times it makes sense to have them choose. Having students go to all stations is perfect when you want them to experience all the activities. This may happen when each station meets a specific goal. And this is true when one station is writing, another is reading, and yet another is tracing or coloring. Each has its own objective. So, of course, you're going to want the kids to go to all those stations. You may also want students to go to all stations when you don't have enough materials for everyone to have their own, or if you know it will be high interest. This happens a lot when using Osmos because I only have two available in the media center. And so we will often rotate through the stations to ensure that everybody gets an opportunity with it. Giving students a choice of stations is a good idea when they don't have to experience all of them because they all meet the same goal. The stations shared throughout this course actually fit this category. They're all going to be working on learning what coding is, learning what a series or a sequence is, learning how to write a program. So, because of the goal is the same, is not important for them to go to all the stations, and we can embed a lot of choice into the stations that will also allow children to make interest-based decisions that meet their particular needs. When students have the opportunity to choose a station to go to, teach them how to make a choice. And we're going to talk more about that in a moment. So, one tip that can help stations go well is providing assistance at them. So, some ways you can do that is having older students come to help out and run a station. They love doing this because, and they're happy to give up their recess. Swear they're happy to come in and help out and run a station. And it's a good eye opener for them to see what it's like to work with younger students. Another great idea is to provide audio or video directions for students to independently access. So there are these great little things where you can tap on them and it will give the audio direction. There are these little things called toonies where you can also have audio directions in there as well. So it's another great resource for that. If you choose to go this route, you just need to teach the kiddos how to access directions this way. If you choose to have older students come help, you have to make sure they know really clearly how to run the station so there aren't any questions. Stations are a really powerful, engaging tool. They take a little bit of time to plan and teach to younger students, but in no time, they're going to be really independent. So let's talk about helping our young learners make choices. Students' choice makes children feel autonomous. They feel as if they have a say in what they are learning and what they're doing to learn. When this happens, it leads to greater engagement. I don't have to tell you that when students are engaged, you don't have to worry about behaviors as much. It's like, woohoo, it's a win win. And some things to consider when engaging students in choice are what it quote unquote sounds like to make a choice. Model that thinking for them about what it sounds like in your head to make a choice. So you might do that by like pointing at your head and saying something like, I'm thinking about which station I want to go to. I really like to color, so the dot to dot station may be good for me, but I also like to build, so the Legos might be a good choice for me. I colored at a station earlier this week, so I think I'm going to build today. That's one great way you can help make that really transparent for them. In making choices that are meaningful to us, this is a developmental trait for younger learners that can be capitalized on in the choices that we're providing. Lastly, we do have to prepare students for what may happen if their first choice isn't available. This can happen when we have limited materials and we still want students to have open choice. This can happen when there isn't enough room for them to fit in one space. So it's important to teach them to have a backup plan, and it helps keep disappointment to a minimum. More about that in a second. And that's where the you might want to you know, add in an opportunity to switch to a new station. So, when materials are limited, let's talk about materials for a second. Before teaching coding to students, they need to know how to care for materials. They need to learn how to use materials for assigned tasks And they need to learn any procedures for cleaning them up. This is especially true for high interest materials like Legos, iPads, and other materials that they would typically have creative freedom with. They need to learn to stay focused when using high interest materials, and that can be super tough for young learners. So, one of the things that you can do to help them with this is give them a limited number of things to do before they can use that material as creatively as they choose. So, for example, when using the mega blocks, students are used to just like taking them and building anything they want. But when we use them for coding at a task based station, I will frequently put 3 cards in front of them and tell them, okay, create these 3 things first, and then you can build whatever you want. And then I just walk around and then I go check in on them to see that they've done it. It's also important to set really clear limits like these to help students learn how to stay on task. It teaches them that part of having fun while learning is being able to use materials that they enjoy. So, when materials are limited, here's what you can do. Have a limited number of children sign up for that station. So you can be like, okay, today only 3 friends can sign up for this, but don't worry, you'll have another opportunity. You can borrow more from another teacher to create an extra station. This is great if you know it's going to be high interest. I do that with our Osmos. We have a couple of Osmos in the building, so I do borrow them from other teachers. Give students a chance to switch to a different station. This will let them get their first choice the second or third time around if they didn't get the first time. You can use alternative instructional models. So sometimes it's good to repeat stations over a number of days to ensure that students have every possible opportunity to use that limited material. So instead of just doing a lesson, having stations out for one day, maybe you have them out for 3 days. Maybe you have them as a like, I'm done with work and now I can do this station. You can also use a model where perhaps students choose from all stations, but one. And that one station is the one that they will each get to. For example, every 10 minutes, students choose a new station, but one time a small group will come with you to work with that limited material. This works really well for items that are pricey and hard to get a lot of, like robots and Osmos. And I'm going to say it's even nice for like the design and drill because sometimes that station can be a little time intensive and can use a little facilitation with the drill and the different tools. There is a materials list provided with this section of the course that are, and what the list includes are materials that I think are really fantastic to teach coding to younger students. It includes suggested apps, it has a list of suggested robots, and it has lists of other materials that you can use during play-based learning. It is an interactive document, which means you can check off what you have to make it easier to see what you need. You can print it out and do that, or you can just do your check marks right on the document itself. There are also live links that will bring you to some items. All you have to do is click on something to see where you can buy it or to see what it looks like. And I have included these because I have found them highly engaging for my young learners, and I found them to be super successful in teaching coding. All right. In the end, all of this upfront work makes it easier to have relaxed fun when it's time to learn coding. So let's talk about a little bit around predictable structure. One thing that makes teaching and learning fun is predictability, or what some call structure. Predictability can look like what the schedule is the same every day. It could be setting up lessons to look the same. It could be how you start and end a lesson. Predictability comes from routines and procedures. It also comes in how lessons are organized. There are many ways to organize a lesson. And one predictable structure that works well is taking the first 5 to 7 minutes to open with a song or activity, using songs and activities to open are a great transition tool. They signal to students that it is time to switch our brains to a new topic. Songs and activities typically take less than a minute to complete, so they're quick, fun, good, easy for a transition. Following that typically is a mini lesson. This can include a read aloud or teaching a specific skill. Sometimes using whole group activities like stop and walk are a fun way to teach a skill like coding or conditionals. And then shortly after that, introduce the stations. Younger students need to see how to independently complete the station in order to be successful at it. And one thing that I know can be time consuming, but is super helpful, is making sure we take clarifying questions. Now, to keep the questions focused, my tip is by phrasing it like this: what questions do you have about coding at our stations on your own today? And that really signals to them, okay, my question can only be about our coding stations. And that will help limit and decrease the amount of off task questions or comments that can come with younger learners. So, the bulk of this time now for the next 10 to 20 minutes is spent on children doing the work. So, Victoria Halsey, she wrote Brilliance by Design, says that students should spend 70% of their time doing. So give them 10 to 20 minutes to work, depending on how much time you have available. During this time, students are going to choose a station and work in it. There may even be time for them to switch stations once or even twice, giving them 3 stations to go to, which is awesome because that means they're learning the concept in multiple ways. And then you're going to have an opportunity for them to share out what they learned. Now, the last 10 to 15 minutes are to clean up. And it's good to wait to clean up before students share out because if there's time left over, they can enjoy some free play with the materials. And it also guarantees that children will have time to share out because they're not focusing on cleaning right away, like in a rush. So, close out with any songs or whole group activities. When we're coding, I like to use activities like the pirate song to have some fun and teach concepts like loops and patterns. And as a classroom teacher, you may only need 5 minutes to clean up and close. As a library media specialist, I find that I need a little bit longer so that students can choose books that they want to borrow. I'm going to add some additional resources for you below. And in the next module, we're going to get into the nitty gritty of starting to teach kids to code.